Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone, and the topic for tonight is target of Venezuela. There's a new book out, on Venezuela, or at least it will be out within a week or two, and it was written by Anya Parampil. Who has been notable as a news reporter and live streamer and close associate of Max Blumenthal. And she just has come out with a book, and it was reviewed by the Black Agenda Report. And I'm going to bring up the review at this point, and we're going to go through it. So, if you'll excuse me for a minute. I'm also going to share this now. I'm going to share it on Facebook before I really get into the meat of this. There we go. Okay, that's all I need to do. So, the title of the article from the Black Agenda Report, reporting on the book, was Corporate Coup, Venezuela and the End of U.S. Empire. And the writer was Ann Garrison, who's a Black Agenda Report contributing editor. This piece was published on the 31st of January, 2024. And the title of the article is the title of the book. Here's a cover. And there's a little statement by Roger Waters. Boots on ground, credible, essential reading. There's a picture, of Anya Parampil, the author of the book. Anya Parampil's book tells the story of U.S. hybrid warfare on Venezuela and of the tectonic social and economic shifts reshaping the world today. So this is a book not only about the Venezuelan coup, but also it's a book on geopolitics. Sanctions, as imposed by the United States, is a sanctimonious word for economic warfare and outright theft. And Venezuela is a textbook case. As Anya Parampil demonstrates in Corporate Coup, Venezuela and the End of U.S. Empire, sanctions were part of a multi-pronged regime change war that included diplomatic aggression, economic terrorism, covert operations, and information warfare. It also included the bizarre U.S. recognition of an obscure Venezuelan legislature, whose name was Juan Guaido, as the president of Venezuela from January 2019 to January 2023, even as the elected president, specifically Nicolas Maduro, remained in power. Ridiculous as that was, it worked. By transferring Venezuela's foreign assets to Guaido and quote, uh, um, his quote, uh, um, um, administration, unquote, by its relentless economic sanctions campaign, the U.S. enabled U.S. and Canadian corporations to suck Venezuelan wealth into their own coffers, where much of it remains to this day. It was a corporate coup, but as Parampil argues in her conclusion, successful only in the near term. Parampil skillfully weaves the personal story of her frontline reporting through the history of this war, beginning in 2019 when she first walked through the front doors of the Venezuelan's foreign ministry, saw a, quote, peculiar art installation. Gradually, she realized it was a sculptural rendering of former Chilean President Salvador Allende's fractured glasses, quote, left shattered on the floor of his office on September 11th, 1973, after U.S.-backed military forces stormed the presidential palace in Santiago and overthrew his government, unquote. What could better symbolize the Bolivarian uh, uh, revolution and the fearsome imperial force it faces still? Days before she walked through those doors, Juan Guaido had declared himself the president of Venezuela, quote, sparking an international political crisis that continues to this day, unquote, even though a Venezuelan pollster demonstrated that a whopping 81% of Venezuelans did not even know who Guaido was at the time, unquote. Venezuelan socialism, U.S. and Canadian corporate vultures. Venezuela embraces the term, quote, socialism, unquote, as Parampil explains, even though the private sector still operates the vast majority of its economy. Its core belief is that the country's vast natural resource wealth, arguably including the world's largest oil and gold reserves, belongs to the Venezuelan people. This, of course, sparks the ire of Western oil and mining companies and the governments that represent them, most of all the United States. Venezuela has a national oil company that owns and manages its oil resources, as did several nations who've been toppled by U.S. coups. The government has also claimed its own gold resources, including the Las Cristinas gold mine, arguably the largest unexploited gold mine in the world. The Crystalex, a Canadian mining company, signed an exclusive contract with the government to develop Las Cristinas in 2022, but Venezuela canceled the contract in 2011. The Crystalex then asserted that Venezuela owed it $3.16 billion plus interest for expropriating the mine, even though it had never been operational. With the help of Guaido's shadow government, Crystalex became the first major player in seizing Venezuela's most valuable international asset, U.S.-based Citgo Petroleum. Parampil describes a fire sale that ultimately benefited both Crystalex and American oil companies. Quote, when a court rules that one corporation such as Crystalex can seize shares belonging to another, such as Citgo, as a debt payment, the shares are not directly transferred from company to company. Rather, the court sells off a portion of the indebted company's assets and uses funds from the sale to pay the claimant. Quote, they're auctioned, unquote, a Venezuelan economist Francisco Rodriguez explained, referring to the indebted company's assets. Quote, in the Citgo case, this meant the court would oversee the fire sale. Hang on one second, please. There we go. Would oversee the fire sale of roughly $1.2 billion worth of its assets, including gas stations, oil pipelines, oil terminals, and refineries throughout the United States in order to satisfy Venezuela's debt to Crystal X. Through the process, oil industry rivals, including Shell, British Petroleum, and ExxonMobil, would gain a chance to expand their share of the U.S. oil market by swallowing up Citgo's infrastructure. Unquote. Voila! Coup complete, or rather started, as Parampil recounts. The U.S. court's decision in favor of Crystal X made way for a host of other corporate vultures to move in on Venezuela's Citgo assets in the U.S. This is, of course, a gross simplification of the complex process that I couldn't have begun to understand without Parampil's masterful guidance through a Byzantine legal and business maze, surviving a medieval siege. The UN rapporteur, Alfredo de Zayas, described the UN sanctions regime on Venezuela as, quote, comparable with medieval sieges of towns with the intention of forcing them to surrender, unquote. But Parampil describes how it greatly restricted imports and thereby starved the private sector that the United States might have been expected to defend. The government responded by instituting CLAP, the Comités Locales de Abastecimiento y Producción, local committees for supply and production, which became President Maduro's, quote, single most effective intervention against U.S. financial war, unquote. While the sanctions regime had reduced Venezuela's GDP by 75%, its living standards by 2%, and increased its mortality rate by 31%, the CLAP program delivered regular shipments of government-subsidized pantry staples and household products to millions of families nationwide. Its success made it an obsession of the U.S. government, which made repeated attempts to undermine the alternative supply chains it depended on, most notably by arresting and imprisoning Alex Saab, the Colombian Venezuelan businessman and diplomat who had undertaken the job of creating them. God forbid that a nation should not only claim its own national resource wealth, but also dare to feed its people. Failed, quote, humanitarian, unquote, invasion. Another storyline in corporate coup is almost as bizarre as the Western recognition of Juan Guaido. In February 2009, 1 month after Guaido inaugurated himself, the U.S. announced that it would force a convoy of humanitarian aid, quote unquote, into Venezuela from Colombia and begin assembling a military presence on the border to oversee the delivery of the goods. The narrative it fed the media was that Venezuela was starving its people and even refusing to allow an aid convoy in. At the time this occurred, it was only on the edge of my consciousness because I was focused largely on understanding the U.S. aggression in Africa. I did not, of course, note that the U.S. was trying to force, quote, aid, unquote, in, and that billionaire Richard Branson was prancing around on the Colombia-Venezuelan border making an ass of himself with his 2019 Venezuela Aid Live concert. Yeah, I'd forgotten about that. Since Branson's billions are derived from oil, gold, or other natural resources, he seemed to be there simply to assert his right to be a billionaire and challenge an economic model that he imagined might actually deny him that right. What I didn't realize before reading Corporate Coup was that the delirious organizers of this stunt were trying to inspire the Venezuelan troops who amassed on the Venezuelan side of the border, okay, to defect and trigger a military uprising that would bring down the Maduro government, Parampil writes. Quote, quoting her, rather than ignite chaos in Venezuela's streets, the February 23rd plot was designed to test the loyalty of the country's armed forces. By forcing Venezuelan troops to prepare for an invasion, Washington waged a psychological war against the military's rank and file with the aim of intimidating them into defection. Trump and his advisors did not hide this objective. Quote, to the Venezuelan military high command, now is the time to stand on the side of the Venezuelan people, unquote. White House National Security Advisor John Bolton tweeted on February 2nd, quote, it is your right and responsibility to defend the Constitution and democracy for Venezuela, said the most anti-democratic person in the world, John Bolton. Sorry, I added that to the article. Some few defected, but the vast majority of the Venezuelan soldiers stood their ground, and the U.S. operation was a dismal failure. Parampil's blow-by-blow account of how this all transpired is well worth reading. There's a sad irony to it now as miles of aid trucks line up on the Egyptian side of the Rafah crossing, waiting to get into Gaza, and the U.S. continues to oppose a ceasefire that would open the way to letting them in. Who remembers Juan Guaido? The U.S.-backed pretender Juan Guaido will no doubt be discussed in future academic discourse on the first 3 decades of the 20th century Venezuelan history. First 3 decades of the 20th century or the first 3 decades of the 21st century. If remembered beyond that, he's likely to be shorthand for a feckless lackey. Okay, a quote, Guaido, unquote, could become similar to a quote, Quisling, unquote, shorthand for quote, traitor, unquote, based on the career of Vidkun Quisling, the collaborator who nominally headed Norway's government during Nazi occupation. Or he may, as Parampil writes, just be a bad, forgettable joke. In any case, U.S. and Canadian corporate coosters are still laughing all the way to the bank. Short-term coup, long-term loss. As Parampil's subtitle, Venezuela and the End of Empire, implies, the hybrid warfare against Venezuela worked to enrich Western corporations, but only in the short term. In the long term, they proved the U.S. and its Western allies to be dishonest international partners and inspired nations like Venezuela to establish new trade relationships, including trade not transacted in U.S. dollars, with more trustworthy partners in the new multipolar world. Parampil's narrative makes for a fascinating read, not only about Venezuela, but also about the tectonic social and economic shifts reshaping the world as we know it today. Corporate Coup can be pre-ordered at a 15% discount from OR Books today. It will be available in paperback and electronic form in March. So there that is. I expect this is going to be a very excellent book, and I think that it's good that we hear about it now in advance of the publication, of the book. But I think this is going to be a very illuminating story of how the United States simply failed to undermine the government, okay, of Venezuela, which is still intact. I think it's still tough, okay, for the Venezuelans uh, to cope, but I think they're in much better shape now than they were when the coup started. And I think their new trade relationships are standing them in good stead. And I expect that soon Venezuela will find itself a part of BRICS. I expect in the next round of additions to BRICS that the BRICS nations will try to add the oil resources of Venezuela to their collective resources. Okay, and if Venezuela were to join them and to take advantage of the trading opportunities, okay, inside, okay, of BRICS, then except for United States oil and Mexican oil, which together is a fairly small percentage of the whole, uh, the absolutely huge oil resources of the BRICS nations would uh, make the oil resources outside of BRICS just a small fraction, okay, of the whole. So I think the future for Venezuela looks bright. A future for U.S. imperialism in Latin America, uh, much less bright. But still, we see the United States trying to turn back the new pink tide using all of the different methods it used with respect to Venezuela. There, it failed. It's having more success in Ecuador, okay, and Peru. Uh, and in Argentina, of course, okay, right now. But still, right now, the dominant governments uh, inside of South America are pink tide governments. And I think their power is just beginning to expand. So we will wait for that. We will wait for BRICS expansion. We will wait for this book, okay, by Anya Parampil, which seems like, okay, a wonderful read. So that's basically the stream for tonight. We have a number of comments and a number of people who came. Andy says, hi, Joe, got babies in tub. Listen as much as possible. Share. Thank you, Andy. Steve Wolfbrand says, hello. Hello, Steve. And Andy says, good Bolton, add Joe. I was wondering, since when did he become a decent guy? He never became a decent guy. Of course, he never became a decent guy. He's still a bad guy. Hopefully, he won't be finding his way into the Biden administration. I mean, God knows the Biden administration could do that. Steve Wolfbrand said, hello, Doc, did you watch the Putin interview? Not yet, but I am waiting in anticipation to see it. Steve says, I've been there. It's beautiful. Well, thank you, Steve. I appreciate your comment about that. I'm expecting it is beautiful. I'm expecting it's going to be very, very good, and that the brilliance of Putin will finally be on display for the American public, for a good slice, okay, of the American public. Hopefully that will happen very soon. Okay, I think that does it for me today in terms of my own streams. This is my third stream here today. I had, as some of you may know, three streams altogether. I had a stream on the threat of fascism again, reading and commenting on a piece by Tom Hartman. And my second stream was about Stephanie Kelton's Sacred Cows, her commentary, okay, on inflation and on the actions, okay, of the Federal Reserve. And I think that was very, very illuminating. And now this stream on Anya Parampil's new book. Tomorrow, I'll be coming back with three more streams. I'm not sure exactly what I'll cover, but it's likely I'll get into the Israel lobby's new 90 million war chest. I'm probably going to cover a prospect article on Jeff Merkley versus the U.S. Senate. And then there's another piece by Stephanie Kelton, and that piece is on, it's part one of a series on the roughly 30 years, okay, of MMT, actually 28 years. And this, okay, is part one. So I'll be getting into those things tomorrow if I don't make a last minute change in something. And I hope to see you there. For now, if there have been no more comments, it will be good night. And he says, the Kelton stream froze on me. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm sure the stream is all right in the video, so you'll be able to go back and see it. Steve says, I can't watch it work. Sorry. And he says, I always thought that Tucker was a magnet. Was a maggot. Well, the world has been changing, and Tucker has been changing. One might say he's still a maggot about some things, but he's increasingly entertaining, okay, about others. And his views now are nowhere near as stereotyped as they were for many, many years. So he's capable of having an outstanding show. Steve says, it finally stopped raining here. I'm so glad to learn that, Steve, because we'll probably be talking to Devorah tonight. I think she was okay. She was in Burbank, and I guess that's a little higher up. So I don't think that she was near flooded out. So, okay. So that's good night for my streams. I will be going to Dee's show, which is at 9 p.m. And that, of course, will be focused on tonight the West Bank, okay, of Palestine and the efforts there of the Israelis to kick a lot of Palestinians out of their homes in Jerusalem. Andy Canny says, what happened to It Never Rains in Southern Cal? I think what happened to It Never Rains in Southern Cal is climate change. I think what we're seeing is the effects, okay, of climate change. Maybe all the rain will make the desert bloom at some point. I don't know. Steve says it rained nonstop for 72 hours, over a foot of rain. Yeah, the atmospheric river that we were hearing about. It was terrible. So good night for tonight. You might want to look in on D's show at 9 p.m. I'm sure that's going to be a pretty good show. So good night for now, and hopefully I'll see you there at 9.